Welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:07 p.m. in Central Europe, pitch black outside. The dark days of winter heading inexorably in our direction. You know, if we have our friends from down under, I congratulate them on their impending spring and summer, but not for us. But for people on the east coast of the United States, it is 3:07 p.m. And they must be very fortunate because the NATO 75th birthday party has begun, which is very, very exciting, and truly a time for rejoicing and a time for the vacuous, pompous speech making. So it is kind of an amazing thing that NATO kind of presents itself as this defensive alliance, and at the same time that it somehow won the Cold War. So I'm not quite sure how, by being a defensive alliance, it actually won the Cold War. Now, if one thinks back on the Cold War, it ended because the Soviet Union, for some strange reasons that we still don't fully understand, chose to dissolve itself. And dissolving itself, basically, it liquidated its alliances, liquidated the Warsaw Pact, liquidated its own state, the Soviet Union, and willfully disintegrated into 15 individual states. Having done that, and made itself extraordinarily weak and vulnerable, they've now turned around and say, well, why are we so weak and vulnerable? And look at what the West has done, is exploiting our vulnerability. Well, of course, everyone could have known at the time in 1989, 1990, 1991, that this is what would happen. And I remember those days, and I, for one, didn't really believe that the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, that very formidable entity created by Lenin, the Bolsheviks, Stalin, and this entity, this Communist Party of the Soviet Union, that had never hesitated to act in the most ruthless way imaginable to hold on to power, brutally putting down all opposition. It never occurred to me that they would just simply toss it all away, really, without a fight, without any clear idea what they wanted to achieve, where they were going. It was a very strange. NATO had nothing to do with any of that, and that's what's important to keep in mind. That NATO was just like a kind of a dog's breakfast, who didn't do anything, and it was a very for things back to those days of the late 80s and early 90s. NATO really played no part in any of that. But the moment the Soviet Union dissolved, they seized that opportunity essentially to aggrandize itself and to enjoy the the perks that come with victory, even though it had not done nothing at all to achieve that victory. They moved in and tried to scoop up every piece of territory of the former Soviet Union and of its allies. So here we are. This is in 1989. At that time, NATO had only been around for 40 years. Now it's been around for 75 years. So in a way, it's now almost before 49 to 91, so 42, 91 to 20, 30, 33. So it's not quite, but almost half of NATO's existence has been after the end of the Soviet Union, which ostensibly was the justification for the creation of NATO. But again, if one looks back on that time, 1949, 1950, 51, when the the Brussels Treaty in 1949, but then they brought in other states. They brought in Greece and Turkey, I think 51, 52. And then, of course, the big one, the big enchilada, was 1954, when they brought in a rearmed West Germany. West Germany began rearming in 1949, but actually bringing in a rearmed West Germany was 1954. And that triggered the creation of the Warsaw Pact. So again, the Warsaw Pact came 6 years after the creation of NATO. And that event, the creation of NATO, immediately kind of militarized Western Europe against the Soviet Union. And at the time, no one really thought, no one particularly liked the Soviet Union, and there were fears about the Soviet Union, and thought, okay, well, great, well, militarized, but of course it had consequences. I mean, one of the obvious consequence was that it would eventually lead to a militarized Eastern Europe, but it would also lead to an extreme crackdown within Eastern Europe. So we had all the show trials that followed, which we talked about before. The show trials that took place in Hungary, the Reich trials, and then of course there were show trials in Poland, and of course in Czechoslovakia, the Slansky trials. So it led essentially to a severe crackdown within Eastern Europe in response to the militarization of Western Europe, when the Soviet Union had every reason to suspect that the ultimate goal of NATO was to push Soviet and communist rule out of Eastern Europe, and of course out of the Soviet Union itself. And let's not forget, the West was very actively involved in sponsoring the Banderites in Ukraine after World War II. So from World War II through to about 1952, it was only about 1952 that Stalin's Soviet Union finally was able to defeat the Banderites in Ukraine. And they were helped, they were helped by the Western powers. So all along, really, NATO was hardly a benign force. But who'd have thunk that the Soviet Union would elect a leadership, the Gorbachev leadership, that would do a mea culpa and say, yeah, you were right all along. We communists were really terrible. Soviet Union was really terrible. We did these really terrible things. We're very, very sorry. And all we really want is to be a part of you. Well, it was a very strange thing to do, but that's eventually what Gorbachev and Yeltsin presented the world as. We just we were wrong about everything. Everything, everything. Communism, terrible system. We did all these awful things. Katyn, yeah, and so on. We joined up with Hitler, and to divide up Poland, and this, we had this secret clauses to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Oh yeah, we were very, very sorry about all that. So nobody could have thought that. But of course, if you dissolve your system without getting any commitments or any guarantees from the other side, which is what happened with Gorbachev, he didn't get anything, and he didn't even try to get anything from the West, and he tossed away all the leverage that he had in that time, 89, 1991, at a time when the West was actually very anxious about getting German reunification, and Gorbachev did not use the presence of Soviet forces in East Germany, Soviet forces throughout Eastern Europe, in order to extract concessions from the West. I mean, you don't do that, and then you don't really preserve your state. Well, what then happens is that your adversary is shock horror, exploits your weaknesses, and that's really what happened. And ever since then, Russia has tried, in a half-hearted way, admittedly in a half-hearted way, to rectify the decisions that were made by Gorbachev. But it isn't, and I say half-hearted way because, of course, Putin has sought to be a part of the West. I mean, he's as much of a kind of a member of the Western fan club as was Gorbachev. Because if one looks back on those days when he first took office, he seemed like obviously he's a protege of Yeltsin, and he was a member of the Andropov's KGB. He was obviously pushed into these important positions. I mean, he was a mid-level guy within the KGB, pushed into these positions within Leningrad, and then which changed his name, St. Petersburg, and then of course pushed to become head of the FSB, and then pushed to be Yeltsin's prime minister. So he was very much a member of this Western loving group at the top of Russia, and everything he did from the time that he came to power was along those lines. We're going to have to keep in with the West. And I remember one of his first acts. When he was 2000, yes, so it was his first act as leader of Russia. I think he was already president by then. 2000, yeah, it was the coup against Milosevic, and he came to Belgrade, in the aftermath of the overthrow of Milosevic. He seemed to have no particular views on the matter. Seemed not to see any threats, any real problems. And even at the time, I thought, well, this is very strange. Now, anybody could have seen that the wars of the 90s, what NATO's wars against Yugoslavia in the 90s, were directed at the Serbs. Why were they directed at the Serbs? Whether the Serbs were the stand-in for Russia. The Serbs were Russia's little brother in Europe. The Serbs were Russia's sole, only means of having any influence at all in Europe. The Serbs were clearly unfairly targeted by the West, obviously unfairly targeted. The whole idea of that, that the wars in the 90s were somehow the fault of the Serbs was obviously nonsense. And the leadership in Moscow should have known that it was nonsense. And the overthrow of Milosevic was the overthrow of a leader who stood up to NATO. And then now you'd have thought a Russian leader would be aware of this and would express grave doubts about these new leaders who were hoisted into power in Belgrade. But no, Putin didn't. He didn't have anything to say on that. But okay, you can say, oh well, it's a learning curve. You make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. The problem was that he did the same thing, the 2013, 2014, at the time of the Maidan coup. Again, you're watching it. I'm watching it, and you think, well, this is obvious what's going on here. That they're targeting Viktor Yanukovych, who won the election in 2010 by promising that he's not going to join NATO. He said that there were all these mistakes had been made in 2008 that actually Ukrainians didn't want to join NATO, and he said, "I'm going to end this." And he did. The laws were changed, and Ukraine declared itself to be going back to what it had been in 1991, which was that it would be neutral power. Well, what happened? Well, of course, the Western powers immediately launched a campaign to get Yanukovych out. It was always going to be just a matter of time. He only wins an election in 2010. And remember, Yanukovych had been robbed of an election victory in 2004 at the time of the Orange Revolution. It was clearly he had won that election. He was robbed of that victory. He finally prevails. And then, of course, again, yet another attempt to get Yanukovych out, organized by the West. And Putin is busy with the Sochi Olympics. Busy. And then, he gets these guarantees from from Merkel, so said, we need restraint shown on both sides. Yeah, we need restraint on both sides. And so he urges, and he did this publicly, he urged Yanukovych to show restraint in against the rioters at Maidan. And then obviously that led to Yanukovych's complete demoralization, collapse, and then signing essentially a suicidal agreement on February the 21st. It was obviously a suicidal agreement. And then Putin, he talks to Obama, and he asks Obama, will you support this agreement that Yanukovych signed with the opposition? And Obama said, yeah, sure, yeah, I'll support it, yeah. And but of course it was it was dead in the water within a few hours. Yanukovych fled for his life, And then Putin says, "Well, we were led by the nose." I don't know. I don't know how one goes on being led by the nose. I mean, you were the one who was in the KGB. You were the one who was worked in intelligence. You were the one who headed the FSB. I mean, you're the one who's supposed to know these things. It was obvious what the goal was. The goal was to get Yanukovych out. The key to get him out was to get him to abjure from the use of force, to say that he will not use force against the president. So he still, as long as he was the president and he could use force, then he still had leverage. Once he surrendered, by signing that agreement with the opposition, he was gone. So and that was that. And the loss of Ukraine, and that was a catastrophic loss. That was the moment Russia had lost Ukraine, losing Yanukovych. Yanukovych was there, and as long as he was there, and he was somebody who was basically, he wasn't pro-Russian, but he wasn't anti-Russian, and that's the best Russia could hope for from Ukraine, which is somebody who was willing to work with Russia, wasn't overtly anti-Russian. He was corrupt or whatever. Who the hell cares? Who cares that he's corrupt? I don't care that Zelensky is corrupt. I don't care that he's got whatever, owns islands, and his wife has whatever jewelry. I don't know whether they're true or not, but okay, I'll assume that they're true. But it doesn't matter. Yanukovych was the key to maintaining Ukraine within the Russian orbit. Once he was gone, it was just it was always going to be very difficult to put the whole thing back together again. And again, why was Putin in Sochi at that time? I don't know. I know, Winter Olympics. First of all, no one really cares about the Winter Olympics. Maybe people pretend they do, but no one does. But even if you do care about the Winter Olympics, there are things that are more important than sport. Anyway, let's go to some of the questions on Locals, our Locals club. And Cynthia, welcome, Cynthia. Always very good to see you. Thank you so much for your generosity, as always, Cynthia. Good evening. The only character in the film, so we're talking about On the Waterfront, which was screened on the Gaggle last night. Well, night for me. Afternoon for our American audience. Morning for people down under. So anyway, the only character in the film last night that really baffles me is Mr. Upstairs. I don't know if he's the owner of the waterfront or just the head of the waterfront mob. It would be good to know this, because if he's the owner, then there's a chance that the waterfront could finally rid itself of the mob. But if he's the head mobster who merely works for the place, then the waterfront will continue to be plagued by the mob, perhaps indefinitely. Well, it's very strange because, to me, there's a sort of odd kind of morality in the film. The mobster, the union, Johnny Friendly. Well, he's somehow presented as the villain. He's the mobster, but the film somehow suggests that he's in the way of the men working, which is just an odd way of seeing things, because normally you think, well, who's in the way of work? Well, the one who's in is usually the capitalists are the ones who are in the way of work. I mean, they're the ones who deny work. They're the ones who are making cutbacks. They're the ones who are always figuring out how they can get more work done with fewer workers, get more done with workers who will take smaller pay, and the union is there to prevent this. I mean, union is there to fight for the rights of the workers. That's what it's there. So the work union is there. Now, you can say the union may not be doing a great job on behalf of the workers, but they're still there to make sure everybody gets work. That's not what the shipping companies, the dock owners. That's not what they're in the business of doing. They don't want men to get a decent pay. They want to hire as few workers as possible. So, I just find it very strange when you're watching films like On the Waterfront that suggest that it's this union boss who, again, may well be corrupt, may well be a very nasty person, but that he is the one who's in the way of workers owning a decent pay. He doesn't, he's not the one who provides work. He's not the one who provides pay. He may be getting skimming off the top. He may be, doing whatever, aggrandizing himself or whatever, but he's still not the person who is the problem for the workers. So, when we look at these workers in the docks, none of whom is doing particularly well. They're all quite poor. It's not because of Johnny Friendly that they're poor. And it's a kind of the strange, with a lot of those films of that time, that somehow the capitalists, basically those who own the means of production, those who actually pay their workers and try to underpay them, try to screw them over, try to make sure that as few are hired as possible, so they can make as big a profit as possible. That we don't worry about them. What we worry about is the corrupt union boss. And that's why I found the film, as I was watching it, just rather confusing. That why are we supposed to hate this Johnny Friendly, and that somehow when we look around the sort of this grim settings and how poor everybody is, and these this terrible houses they all live in, and this obviously a very depressing, dismal life that all those dock workers enjoy. Why is he to blame? And yet that we listen to the priest ranting away that somehow it's all the fault of the corrupt union boss. And I don't see it. I mean, it's, why is it his? Whatever his faults may be, he's not the one who is responsible for the fact that the workers are underpaid and that the workers don't get enough work all the year round. Because, again, he may not be doing a great job, but it is the union that does protect the workers to make sure that they're not thrown out of work, that they're not undercut by cheap scab labor. So you can see how it's this film, which won all those Oscars, is basically a very anti-union film. So it's not just very anti-communist because of Elia Kazan and the whole rationalization for what he did by naming names before HUAC. So we can leave that part is leave that aside, and of course with the writer Bud Schulberg. But there's the other side of it, which is that it somehow suggests that workers' real problems are not with capital, as we might have thought. I mean, for all, they're the ones who hire labor, and they're the ones who try to undercut labor. No, their problem is union bosses, organized labor, whose job it is to protect them. So I just found the whole film just this very strange morality there, and but it's in a way it's a reflection of the political atmosphere of 1954. This film, I think, I can't remember how many Oscars it won. Cynthia, you probably remember. I think it was a lot of Oscars. It romped home with all the big Oscars, and it seems like nobody really thinks that, hey, I mean, this is a very very retrograde movie. And again, I mean, it was hailed as one of the great American movies and everything, and yet we watch it now and think, well, this is very peculiar that you make the union boss the villain, and it's very peculiar that you make a stoolie the hero, somebody who rats out his friends. So I don't know. It to me just seems a very. I mean, yeah, obviously the film is well made, but it's a very bizarre kind of morality to it. But but still people don't criticize it very much. I mean, I remember when Martin Scorsese, I think the New York Times did a whole story on watching on the waterfront with Scorsese. So he, in other words, he would be sitting there watching the movie with a New York Times reporter, and then he would be giving his responses. This was, I don't know, so quite a long time. It was some time ago, and he was very, didn't even deal with the politics of it. All he was concerned with was, how brilliantly it was directed, and Brando's performance, and all of that. And that's all fair enough. I mean, it was a very well made film, and Brando's performance was really quite extraordinary. Yeah, but it hits you right away. But it's a very peculiar politics. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. So Dale Owens, good to see you, Dale. Good evening. Marty, always good to see you. Good evening. And then Cynthia goes on. Just a hypothetical question for you, George. Say, for instance, if the Communist Party had become one of the dominant political parties in the U.S., do you think it would have remained a party that represents ordinary Americans and opposes war, or would it have devolved into the pro-corporate, pro-war uniparty of today? Well, it's a very interesting question. The Communist Party in the United States, as most of the communist parties, followed the line from the Soviet Union. So it was anti-war between. So it advocated for the Popular Front in the mid-1930s. Then it became sort of another Popular Front against the fascists, and therefore implicitly in favor of war against Nazi Germany, say, from the mid-1930s up until 1939. Then after the signing of the Nazi-Soviet Pact of August 1939, then the party became anti-war. And then 1941, with the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, the party was in favor of war and obviously very supportive of the Soviet Union. And you'd think, okay, they would probably have followed the Soviet line up until they would realize, as did the Italian Communist Party in the 1970s, that if you want success, electoral success, you want to start distancing yourself from the Soviet Union. And that's what the Italian communists did once they essentially became the largest opposition party to the Christian Democrats in Italy. And so suddenly, well, maybe, we're not going to leave NATO. Maybe we're not as anti-American as we had been in the past. What about the sort of democratic centralism? The core principle of Leninism. We have to adapt Communist Party to the democracies of the West. That's the Soviet Union. We have our own distinctive brand of communism. And so, so you're not going to abolish democracy. No, we have no intention of doing that. Now, the Italian communists did all of that, and it didn't do them any good. Having reached their zenith, I think 1976, with the historic compromise with the Christian Democrats, whereby they weren't actually part of the government, but they were the largest party in the largest party next to Christian Democrats in the parliament, but they didn't try to vote against the Christian Democrats. So it was a kind of, they would abstain, but they would not try to bring the government down. So unprincipled was this stance that they began the kind of an inexorable collapse from that moment on, from 1976 on. So year after year, their vote just kept declining. And it's a very interesting that it's not unlike what's happened with National Rally. I mean, you got someone like Marine Le Pen, who he's pretty much abandoned every position that the National Rally and the National Front before that held. And I mean, we have all the social issues that were supposed to be very conservative, like abortion. I think they abandoned that position. Gay marriage, they abandoned that position. They were going to leave the EU. They abandoned that position. They were going to leave the euro. They abandoned that position. Then they were going to withdraw from the NATO Central Command, Integrated Military Command, rather. They abandoned that position. Well, when you do all that, you kind of don't really give, much of a reason for people to vote for you. And I think that, even though, as we pointed out in our podcast or in our live stream yesterday, the National Rally did pretty well. I mean, they got the largest percentage of the vote. They got a larger percentage of the vote than did Macron's Ensemble. They got a larger percentage of the vote than did the left. They got, in terms of sheer number of votes, they were easily the largest party in the election. But because of the trickery of this electoral alliances, they were basically kept out of power. And so that's why you got the least number of seats, even though you got the most votes. So all that is true. However, you do have to wonder whether had Le Pen been a little bit more principled, if she was actually ready to stand on some of the like historic issues that the National Rally was supposed to embrace. Had she done that, maybe she'd have done better. And that's why, just going back to your question, Cynthia, you kind of wonder that if the more you kind of try to be a part of the establishment, the more you want to be acceptable, the more you want to be electable, the less reason you offer for people to vote for you. If you're just like everybody else, then why bother voting? Now, as we saw in France, you can win even though nobody really wants you because of alliances. Or as in Britain, again, nobody really wanted Keir Starmer's Labour, but simply because the Tory vote completely collapsed. But ultimately, I mean, if you just simply become like everyone else, so when you say would have been a party that represents ordinary Americans and opposes war, I would bet that if you had an American Communist Party, they would be like the Greens. They'd devolve into a kind of like a Green Party. Yeah, we're against war, but Russia is so terrible that we need to send all arms to Ukraine. Yeah, we're against war, but we need to bring Ukraine into NATO. We're want to help workers, but at the same time, we can't go around supporting all sorts of silly strikes. So you would think, what would the American Communist Party become? I think they would have become a sort of like the Greens, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, sort of fairly empty, kind of posturing. Maybe not so much AOC, more like Bernie Sanders. So they probably would have become like a Bernie Sanders. They're totally ineffectual, totally pointless. You're not providing anyone with any real reason to vote for you. And so like Bernie said, Bernie Sanders was robbed in 2016. Probably was, but nobody cares because it wouldn't have made any difference even if Bernie Sanders had won the Democratic nomination instead of Hillary Clinton. So I don't. I mean, when you look at the how ineffectual the communists have turned out to be, and they have become extraordinary again, as in Western Europe. I mean, they used to be the such powerful parties in France and in Italy, and then they kind of collapsed ignominiously, not unlike the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, an ignominious collapse. So Marty says, I see Wesley Clark has returned to the stage. There is a virtue in shooting kids that throw. So he's got a link here. So let's follow the link. Wesley Clark was, of course, NATO Supreme Allied Commander at the time of the bombing of Yugoslavia. And here what we have with Wesley Clark, Atlantic Council Board Director Wesley Clark just said there is a virtue in shooting kids that throw rocks. Okay, so that's okay. So he's obviously supporting Israel. And so John Schwartz said, well, this whoever John Schwartz is. I assumed Wesley Clark was talking about the need to shoot Palestinian children throwing rocks. But if you look at the whole context, he seems to be saying that we haven't been killing enough Houthis. It's hard to know, but his main point is kill, kill, kill. Now, Wesley Clark, I mean, we've talked about him before. But what I remember, I mean, leave aside when he was the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe in 1999, and he essentially led the NATO bombing, and he kind of was ready for a shootout with Russian soldiers at Pristina airport in June 1999. So, but leave that aside. So he then is pushed into 2004. Decided he was going to run for the Democratic Party nomination in 2004. The idea behind that run was to head off an anti-war Democrat. The worst possible person emerged as the anti-war Democrat in that 2004 election, which was that absolute moron, cretin, idiot, Howard Dean. I mean, if you look at his face, I mean, that is about the stupidest person imaginable. I mean, that guy exudes thickness. But anyway, Howard Dean was built up as an anti-war candidate, even though he wasn't anti-war. But he somehow said that, well, I think I think we can go to war in Iraq as long as we can get the approval of the UN Security Council, which is, so he wasn't against it. Well, I was against George Bush's war. So this is 2003. So already it was already a bit bloody late in the day because the invasion has already happened. I mean, they didn't bother to get a UN Security Council resolution because they were never going to get a UN Security Council resolution when you had 3 permanent members of the Security Council that opposed the American invasion. So Bush went ahead with that invasion without the UN Security. But Howard Dean somehow said this. Now, that was such a stupid position to take, first of all, because it's already been done. The invasion has happened. We don't need no stinking UN Security Council resolution. That's the position of Bush. But also, even if you got a UN Security Council resolution, that still wouldn't have made the invasion of Iraq all right. I mean, just because you get a permission slip from the UN Security Council, that doesn't make it okay. I mean, we had those sanctions imposed on Iran, which were appalling, because Iran was enriching uranium, which it was doing because it has a peaceful nuclear energy program. So we had UN Security Council supported sanctions. You had UN Security Council supported sanctions on Iraq that went on for years, causing a great deal of suffering. You had the UN Security Council sanctions on North Korea. So just because it's approved by the UN Security Council doesn't make them good. But anyway, so he did all that, and then clearly the Democrats were a little concerned that Howard Dean was going to win that nomination. So they pushed forward Wesley Clark, who could be anti-Bush, anti-war, and against the invasion, while having the credentials of a 4-star general. So I'm against Bush, I'm against the invasion of Iraq, but I know something about war. I'm no peacenik. You can't accuse me of being soft on military. And so suddenly he became this the peace candidate. So there he was a few years earlier, 1999, bombing Yugoslavia, and in 2003 he's the peace candidate. So and as he did so, he came up with this ridiculous story, which is quoted ad nauseum, that somehow he went to the Pentagon and somehow he somebody had confided to him that there were plans to invade 7 countries in the Middle East. He had seen these plans to invade 7 countries in the Middle East. So in order to show how terrible were these neoconservatives. And to this day, people go around quoting this. Wesley Clark said this, that he had seen plans to invade 7 Middle Eastern countries. It must be true, because why would Wesley Clark lie about this? Well, why would Wesley Clark? Why wouldn't he? I mean, he was lying all the time during the invasion during the attack on Yugoslavia. He was lying constantly about what NATO was doing, but he had every incentive to lie because he was running for the Democratic Party nomination. And he wanted to present, why, these are the people we're up against, these Bush people. I have seen these plans. He never presented those. He never presented the documents. Can you show us these documents where, they outline these 7 countries that were going to be invaded? But people want to believe what they want to believe, and I can click on Twitter right now, and I type in Wesley Clark, and sure enough, there'll be some idiot tweeting out, well, look at what Wesley Clark said in 2003 about having seen these plans for invading 7 countries in the Middle East. Anyway, he then, during this aborted campaign for the Democratic Party nomination, he did start attacking Israel. And he did suggest that there was a Israel lobby that was pushing for this war in Iraq. That's what sank his campaign. A lot of people got very excited about this, and particularly on the sort of anti-war people, like antiwar.com. Oh, look, Wes Clark. He suddenly became Wes, no longer Wesley Clark. He was Wes Clark now. Oh, Wes Clark is attacking the Israel lobby. Well, he wasn't. He was somewhat inexperienced in politics, and he was obviously trying to have a go at the neocons, and so he took on the the Israel lobby. Well, that ended his campaign. So I'm kind of amused by this tweet that we had just looked at, because I just remembered how he suddenly was back then. This was 2003, 2004. He was targeting the Israel lobby, but now apparently he seems to think that shooting kids is fine, which again is kind of interesting. We're having everybody now tearing their hair out over this. Oh, Russia has hit a hospital. Russia is targeting hospitals. Well, Russia is obviously not targeting hospitals. Never has targeted hospitals. But Israel has specifically targeted hospitals. I mean, it hasn't made a secret of it. It hasn't said, oh, that was just simply an accident. That was collateral damage. We didn't really target the hospital. It was just unfortunate. We got the wrong target. We hit the hospital. Israel doesn't say that. Israel says, yeah, we targeted this hospital, children's hospital, because it's the Hamas headquarters. So that's what, that Israel actually does that, and nobody says anything. But here, I'm sort of, oh my God, Russia is targeting hospitals. I've never heard of anything so horrible. Can you imagine? There's little babies getting killed. I've never heard anything as horrible. Later on the news, yeah, but Israel is just, attacked the hospital. Yeah, that was because it's Hamas headquarters. Anyway, so there was Marty. All right, let's see another link on X, and here, what's the link? Oh no, I guess it's the same thing. All right. Anyway, go on. And then Cynthia says, says, I know you want to put on Glengarry Glen Ross up for a vote this week, but it's hard to think of any films that are similar to it. A classic equivalent of it would be Death of a Salesman. Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, I guess Death of a Salesman is kind of heavy going. Okay, yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. Looking further back, then that would be part of a part talkie, part dark comedy film, Modern Times. More recent films, which are kind of like it, are American Psycho and Fight Club. And if you think the film as a con man film, F for Fake and The Sting come to mind. That's very, very interesting. I mean, Glengarry Glen Ross is, I mean, it's about salesmen, but it's really about the brutality of that kind of work, the humiliations that you have to endure by selling something, that your entire existence is bound up with making a sale. If you don't make a sale, you're done. I mean, you don't eat, and the terrible effect this has on not just on your health but on your psyche and what you think of yourself. So I mean, I guess Death of a Salesman is like that, but it's but in Death of a Salesman there's a lot more to that, so it's not. I mean, what I liked about Glengarry Glen Ross is that it has a certain energy to it, and a sort of a certain entertainment to it. Death of a Salesman, I always thought was very heavy going. I mean, that is a dismal film. But yeah, but there's that film. I can't remember the exact title of it, which might be similar. I don't know. It had, Cynthia, you may know what I'm talking about. It has Clark Gable playing. This is already late in Gable's career. He plays a big advertising executive, and he has to sell something. He has to come up with an advertisement for some soap. I can't remember. Let me see if I can find it. I probably won't be able to find it now. And so it's again the humiliation of coming up with this proper advertising. Let's see. Just remember, because you're Cynthia, you're a great film expert, and I gotta point this film out. No, that's all right. Let's see. Well, that's it. Yeah, this is the one. This is so it's not quite as late as I thought. It was called The Hucksters. The Hucksters. And here it says the description is a World War II veteran wants to return to advertising on his own terms, but finds it difficult to be successful and maintain his integrity. So, I'm going to put it to you, Cynthia, see if you think that would be something that is suitable in order to compete with Glengarry Glen Ross. Obviously, it's much more. It's kind of a comedy, but it is about the humiliation of working in that kind of business. Anyway, Marty, thank you so much for Buddy. Buddy will appreciate it to the extent that he can, but he's such an ungrateful bastard that I have to thank him on his behalf because he doesn't have the manners. That is becoming of a proper dog. Oh, Cynthia says the Hucksters is a 1947 comedy. Yeah, that's right. And yeah, then Cynthia gives a good description there. Let's go back. So yeah, and then William Taylor talks about the German Greens were pro-war and depleted uranium weapons and pro-blowing up pipelines. No, I mean that's exactly right. They kind of are a kind of a fake, a pseudo left. Their entire raison d'être was to destroy the social democrat left, which was always the kind of the bête noire of the Americans, and then they kind of replaced them. And lo and behold, they were basically a kind of a mainstream pro-NATO party. And that's, that was, again, goes back to the 90s. It's not something that just happened. That was the 90s. The key figure in the attack on Yugoslavia in 98, 99 was Joschka Fischer, who was the German foreign minister. He was the head of the Greens, and he was the one. I mean, Schroeder was the chancellor, but Schroeder wasn't, his heart wasn't really in it. It was Joschka Fischer who really pushed for it, and Joschka Fischer who was against any kind of a peace deal with the Serbs. So this is, and it was striking that Annalena Baerbock absolutely was determined to get that job. When this traffic light coalition was set up, the Greens were determined that they needed. That was the key. That was the job they prized. Foreign minister. So Annalena Baerbock, Joschka Fischer, absolutely the most vehement bombers, the most vehement Russophobes, Serbophobes. So it was a kind of a pseudo left. You marginalize the real left, because after all, the left of the Social Democrats had been anti-war, had been anti-NATO, and would have been opposed, and they were opposed to the bombing of Yugoslavia, and said, we're kind of going back to the bad old days of the whole, Serbian was Sterbian, Serbs must die. We're going back to that. But they were marginalized. And that was the Oscar Lafontaine. Those people like him were pushed aside. And we got the Greens. So it's anyway, Lenslark said the Greens are by far the most extremist ideology in Europe. Absolutely. Lenslark asked, when Ukraine collapses, will Poland carve off a peace? No, I really don't think that's on the cards. I don't think the Americans will allow Ukraine to collapse, and the Americans aren't going to allow anyone to carve out a piece of Ukraine. I think Ukraine is far too useful to keep it going, because whatever, let's say there's some armistice, and we've got there's the Donbass, Kherson, Zaporozhye are a part of the Russian Federation, or so Russia claims. This would be it would be absolutely essential to maintain a Ukraine that will refuse to accept it, and a Ukraine that can be used to renew the war at any time. In other words, Ukraine will be armed, strengthened, rearmed, militarized over the next 10 years in order to restart the war at any time. If you start allowing Poland to carve off a piece, and Romania to carve off a piece, Hungary to carve, then there won't be a Ukraine, and then you won't be able to maintain that conflict with Russia. And I think that's what the United States will insist on. So I don't think that whole view that everyone's going to take a piece of Ukraine, I think it's nonsense. Medvedev talks like this. I think it's just nonsense. Yoabichi, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Robert, also, thank you very much. Robert asks, what was Zhirinovsky saying in the post-USSR period? I can only imagine he tried to convince Putin that the West was much more of a threat than Putin realized. I think he was. I think that's what his view was, but that Putin seemed to believe that he can work something out with the West, with his good friend Angela Merkel. And Zhirinovsky, I think, was rightly believed that the West had no interest with good relations with Russia. The West had been afraid of the USSR, particularly after the USSR's spectacular victory in World War II. I mean, it was, in comparison with what the USSR did, the British did virtually nothing. The French did virtually nothing. The Americans did, some things, but nothing on the scale of what the USSR did. And so there was an awe and respect that was directed toward the USSR after 1945. And that's why, no one wanted to mess with the USSR. So whenever you had these crises within Eastern Europe, you were 53 in East Berlin, 56 Hungary, 68 Czechoslovakia, 80 Poland. The line in the West was, we don't get involved because you don't want to mess with the Soviets. I mean, those people mean business. And so there was a fear of the USSR, and hence the respect that was shown towards the USSR. And hence, how did they get that agreement, that Helsinki final act? Well, it was out of respect and fear of the USSR. The moment that Gorbachev and Yeltsin tossed it all away, that fear and respect went with it. I mean, that was the point. That was why it was so stunning what Gorbachev did. I mean, how could you not envisage that the moment you weaken yourself in this way, you're going to lose the respect of your adversaries? And I think that Zhirinovsky realized that there was no way that the West was going to show Russia any kind of respect. They were going to try and exploit a Russian weakness as much as they could, and they did. The 90s were and not even just the 90s, all the way through, including up to and including what they did at Maidan, was they thought it was just a reflection of Russian weakness. Because this, let's keep in mind, it's almost now, it's stunning to think what they did at Maidan here, right into Russia's own backyard. They went ahead and toppled Russia's man, or at least I don't think he was Russia's man, but that he was perceived as Russia's man, which is why they wanted him out. So even as that late stage, 2014, the West had no respect at all for Russia. I think Zhirinovsky realized this, and I'm not sure Putin did. I mean, I think Putin really did believe that he has some kind of a relationship with Angela Merkel. She speaks Russian and he speaks German, and they have, and so on. It's to be fair, I mean, Putin was dealt a bad hand. I mean, he came on the scene already when Russia was very much weakened, and he had to somehow do something with that. But whether he could have done more, that's a different issue. But I think Zhirinovsky said, they are not going to deal with Russia. They're not going to show any respect for Russia. They're not going to help Russia. They're not going to do anything other than to pursue policies that weaken and ultimately destroy Russia. That that's what's going to be, and unless we make ourselves strong and resist, I think we're going to be completely overwhelmed. Anyway, Mary Grossman says, so anyway, thank you so much, Robert. Mary Grossman says, like the idea of featuring a performer like 100-year-old Eva Marie Saint, a nice diversion from politics, like films with humor. I think that is what I was doing as I listed films by actors. No, I agree with you. I thought that was very very heartening that she's still alive. I mean, it's because in some way she is a kind of we still have some connection with the old Hollywood. I remember when a few years back when Kirk Douglas finally died. I can't remember. He was 102 when he died, and you felt that something really died in American culture, because as long as somehow Kirk Douglas stayed alive, we still were in touch with the great days of Hollywood, the really classic era of American cinema. The classic era in the way that when people really admired not just American movies, but the America that was presented in those movies. So when Kirk Douglas died, and then soon afterwards, Olivia de Havilland, which also died. So again, something died. So now Eva Marie Saint was clearly not as big a star as Kirk Douglas or Olivia de Havilland, but it's nice that she's still there with us. Mary Grossman says, regarding unions, Minnesota mining and manufacturing placed factories in small towns to avoid a union. Yeah. For example, a $3 million CEO placed a factory in a small town where his grandma lives. Yeah, no, I think that's right. They did everything they could to avoid a union, and a union. What do unions do? I mean, the unions do. They make sure that their workers work, and the workers get paid decently. So they want to make sure that they're not undercut by cheap non-union labor. But it's always the argument against unions is always presented that somehow the workers would be so much better off without a union. You're always told that, you're always going to be so much better off. The unions are standing in the way of you're making a real lot of money. It's all the fault of the unions, and it's a crock, and it's an absolute crock. But that's how they sell it. That's if only you didn't have a union, you'd be making so much more money. It's like they're standing in the way. So and that's why I thought watching that film. There's something really, I don't know, somewhat disgusting about it. I mean, the whole theme of this film, that the reason everyone is living in these horrible houses, they don't have any money, they're this drab existence, and it's all the fault of Johnny Friendly, the union leader. Really, the union leader is the one who ensures that you don't get paid properly? Really? He's the one who pays you, and yet it seems to suggest that he's the one who pays you. He's the one who employs. So it's like the employers just somehow vanish in all of this. They're just there somewhere. The real villain is the union boss. Yeah. Maz Damu, nice to see you again. Oh yeah, good. Welcome back. Hi, George. I've been off a while. Yeah. You've been quite a while now. So, hope you and Peter and all the other Gagglers are well. Thank you. And very nice to see you again. And Mary, thank you so much for your tip. And then Dale says, what do you make of the movie Reds? Well, I didn't really like the film very much. I didn't like Warren Beatty. I thought it was done. To me, it just seemed like a very a shallow film. Um, I mean, the story of John Reed is definitely very interesting, but I know the film didn't grab me very much. However, now that you mention it, I mean, that may be something that's worth maybe worth screening on the Gaggle and see what Gagglers think. I mean, it's a while ago since I saw it. I didn't like it very much at the time. Again, I just find it hard to get past BT. To me, he's always the randy hairdresser of Shampoo. I don't think he's much of an actor. He never quite gets beyond that kind of randy guy, good-looking guy who's always gets all the girls. That somehow I just didn't think he was the right as John Reed. Yeah, but I mean, we could have a board and Reds, Dr. Zhivago, and maybe, I don't know, Cynthia, you could think of a couple of other things. I mean, we can put on that board and see what people think. But thanks for the suggestion. Judy, good to see you, Judy. And says, but did Russia have the economic strength in 2014 to withstand the extreme sanctions that would have been levied against them if they invaded then? They were hit with mild sanctions just for Crimea. The Russians were net agricultural importers in 2014, but now they are major exporters. Same with industrial capacity, which was still being rebuilt after the West pillaged everything earlier. Well, that's a very good point. But I wasn't really suggesting a full-scale invasion. I mean, my issue was that Putin needed to ensure that Yanukovych stayed in power. Remember, I mean, the protests at Maidan went on for quite a while. The intent was fairly obvious. This is a kind of a rent-a-mob. This is being whipped up, financed, supported from abroad. The goal is to topple Yanukovych. The goal is to prize Ukraine away from Russia. Ultimately, the goal is to take Crimea away from Russia. That was fairly obvious. And what I found astonishing, and even when we look back at that record, is why didn't Russia take a much more severe line on what was going on in Maidan? Because they didn't support Yanukovych. They really didn't support him at that moment when they were telling Yanukovych not to use force, when Yanukovych absolutely needed to use force. He was up against NATO-inspired mob. That this NATO-inspired mob was never going to stop until they overthrew Yanukovych. So that's why they should have, when Yanukovych asked Russia, will you support me if I use force in the Maidan? They said, yeah, absolutely. And if you need any additional force, we will provide that additional force. And I think that would have been that's the position. Again, I always go back to this. In the Soviet era, that's what they did. I mean, they moved very quickly when they realized that the situation was getting out of control, and it was obvious, fairly early on with Maidan in the winter of 2013, 2014, that the situation is spiraling out of control, and then you have to do something. So again, in Hungary, they really didn't hesitate. I mean, they said the situation is getting out of control. This is, basically the Communist Party is just disintegrating, and it's just a matter of time before Hungary announces that it's withdrawing from the Warsaw Pact. In fact, Nagy did announce that Hungary was withdrawing from the Warsaw Pact, but by that time, Nagy's fate was already sealed. So that in itself it wasn't decisive in persuading the Russians to invade. But they knew that if they hesitated, then the whole thing would collapse. Same thing in Czechoslovakia. I mean, they saw in Czechoslovakia it's spiraling out of control, and if you wait a little while longer, the communists would just lose power in Czechoslovakia. And so they made their decision, which was something that was going to be condemned ferociously around the world. Everybody and his uncle was going to scream and holler about the Soviet Union invading Czechoslovakia. And, the United Nations and everywhere else, everyone would condemn. You had to bite the bullet. Now, I think they had much better options with Yanukovych. I should have supported Yanukovych, and then if after that, then they needed to still invade. I don't think the sanctions would have been that severe if all they had done was to send in their troops to support Yanukovych. I mean, there would have been severe sanctions, but there would have been a legal basis, because they would say, well, Yanukovych asked us to help. I mean, yeah, of course, there'd be sanctions, condemnation, screaming and hollering in the West, but there would have been a legal basis, much like with Bashar al-Assad. When Assad had invited Russian forces, well, he's the legitimate government in Damascus. He invited Russia to come and save him, which is what they did. So the question is, if they did it for Assad, why couldn't they do it for Yanukovych? Now, again, they didn't have the economic strength in 2014. On the other hand, Russia has withstood sanctions and all kinds of things in the past. So I think it would have coped not as well as they did in 2022, but it would have coped if it's a truly existential matter. If you really see this as something that truly Russia's existence is at stake, then you just have to take the punishment of the sanctions. I think I just think that the bad mistakes were perpetrated then. Anyway, Judy, thank you very much. Appreciate your question. Appreciate your generous tip. Thank you so much. Meant to include the tip of the message: always watching to see if Apple is sneaking up behind me. Yes, he's very energetic. He just doesn't have any no real empathy for me. He's just he's self-absorbed, selfish. Anyway, let's yeah. So Cynthia tells us about the hucksters, which I think we can take a look at that, see if some of the figures were there. Edward Arnold, who I mean, if people don't remember Edward Arnold, his best part was in Meet John Doe, where he played this fascist leader in the making. Did a very good job, as a very sinister character. So, but he's in there. And then Marty says, handmade films, how to get ahead in advertising. Yeah, that's good. There's also and I don't know whether people would like it. It was made in the 1960s, and so it has some of the style of the 1960s, which I'm not a huge fan of. I'll never forget what's his name. It had Orson Welles in it. I mean, it was a cameo. He didn't play a big role in it, but it was about, again, about a former advertising executive played by Oliver Reed, but it's done in that quirky way that films were made in the 1960s. But if you want to watch Orson Welles, circa 1960s, with his usual kind of cynical humor, that's not a bad it's not a bad thing to watch. I'll never forget what's his name. And then R. Brown says, I found The Grapes of Wrath, 1940 Henry Fonda, to be in a class with On the Waterfront. What are your thoughts on that film? That was good. It was a good film. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a little bit relentless. I mean, there's not, it's hard going, it's heavy going, but so was On the Waterfront. And again, I felt that yesterday as we were watching it, that it's kind of humorless. I mean, it's other than there are a few quirky things in there, such as when Brando puts on Eva Marie Saint, tries to put on her small gloves, which is sort of entertaining, but otherwise it's it's one that is heavy going. And I thought Grapes of Wrath was like that. I mean, it's there's not not much not much I don't know, a few I don't know, I know, a little bit of levity. So it's a little depressing as you watch it. But yeah, definitely. I mean, if when you watch something like How Green Was My Valley, which of course that was the film that won the Oscar for the best film the year of Citizen Kane. So Citizen Kane did not win best film because it was won by How Green Was My Valley. But How Green Was My Valley had quite a lot of humor in it. It was about this Welsh mining town. But Grapes of Wrath was definitely heavy going. Like, I'm a fugitive from a chain gang. So anyway, but I don't I don't know if there's we'll see about whether there's a desire to see that. Robert says, as a competitive film to run against the huckster, I suggest the great William Powell amusing film High Pressure of 1932, in which Powell portrays the epitome of a fast-talking promoter. Yeah, I may have seen this. I don't know. Like it could be. William Powell is always worth watching. He's a lot of fun. I really like him. The epitome of fast-talking promoter. Advertising is an interesting phenomenon emerging as a result of the excess production capacity inherent in the mass production methods of the Industrial Revolution. Yeah, I agree. That it is. You have to keep ramming something down people's throats, even though they don't want it. So that's the key. You got to persuade people to buy something that they don't actually want. And so again, there's a dubious morality in this. Is that you're trying to fool people into buying something they don't really want. Let's go back. And Lava Jaw asks, what is the best long-term strategy for Serbia now? NATO, BRICS, or sitting on two chairs? Well, I mean, if you ask me what will Serbia's long-term strategy is, well, it'll be sitting on two chairs, which is kind of painful because you're going to fall and you're going to hurt yourself. My feeling is for Serbia would be to try to cultivate as many powers outside NATO land as possible. So whether with the BRICS, become a part of the China's Belt and Road Initiative. So to make yourself as economically invulnerable as possible. Now, the problem in Serbia that you've got, maybe 30-40% of the population that is absolutely desperate to get in with NATO and the EU. They always have been. Going all the way back to the Milosevic era. The ones who toppled Milosevic in order to curry favor with the West. And so they're saying let's abandon, all our traditional friendship with Russia. Let's abandon our whole thing about the Orthodox culture, and pursue EU membership. Cooperate with them. Now, Serbia does all of that. I mean, Serbia cooperates with NATO very actively. You go to the NATO website and type in Serbia, and you'll see just how extensive Serbia's cooperation with NATO is. So that is a very powerful force within Serbia. Now, there are powerful forces against it. The people who kind of remember what happened to them in '99. There, the brutality that NATO showed towards them, the contempt, and so the Serbian opinion remains divided. But when you get somebody like Vucic. Vucic he wants to sit on two chairs. He wants to sit there and have all of those, keep on board all of those Westerners, all of the ones who want to be in with NATO. But he also wants to show the people who remember him from the Milosevic era. I'm with you, and so on. Now, he has said, that, I'm going to be very cute, that I'll say, well, we support Ukraine because we support the territorial integrity of Ukraine, because, of course, by doing so, we want to maintain the territorial integrity of Serbia, and therefore the non-recognition of Kosovo independence. Well, you see, that's what's known as being cutesy, because, of course, the West has no respect just because you go and take this principled position that, we support the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and I hope, in turn, you will support the territorial integrity of Serbia. No, we are not going to do that. We're very happy that you are taking the NATO position on Ukraine, but we'd like more from you. We want you to abandon all of your relations with Russia. As for Serbia, you have to get rid of the notion that Kosovo is still a part of Serbia. So the point of this is that this is a totally absurd position for Serbia to take. Serbia's only chance, and it's a very slim chance, but its only chance of ever getting Kosovo back is by sticking with Russia, because it was Russia that has taken a consistent position on Kosovo and said we will not recognize the independence of Kosovo because it was done illegally. Kosovo was prized away from Serbia as a result of NATO's bombing and NATO's invasion of Serbia. Now, the idea that you can take the sort of, we've been consistent, your only shot with Kosovo is by sticking with Russia and basically tell him that in Ukraine, we have the self-determination of people who were forced into Ukraine against their will. just say, yeah, I mean, the people, that in the southeast of Ukraine have the right to self-determination because they were forced into Ukraine. Their leadership, they were betrayed by a coup in Kiev, and therefore they have a right after this betrayal to opt to out of Ukraine. I mean, it's not difficult for any politician to say that there's no parallel between Kosovo being prized away from Serbia. There is no parallel to that from the people in the Donbass who were betrayed by the coup in Kiev. They should be able to do that and say, yeah, so I'm supporting Russia. But instead, well, I can't support Russia because of Kosovo. We Serbia takes we're pro-territorial integrity, so we can't do that. What territorial integrity? What are you talking about? I mean, Ukraine was an artificial state, which Russia was perfectly happy to let leave as is. Except that NATO did to Ukraine and to Russia what NATO did to you, which was to try to turn Ukraine into a battering ram against Russia. It's kind of what they did to you by using the Kosovo Liberation Army to provoke a war against Serbia, and then NATO moved in as the air force for the KLA, and with a view, this is a humanitarian intervention. We have to do this. We have to save the Albanians from genocide at the hands of the terrible Serbs. That's what they did. They did what NATO did in Ukraine is exactly what they did in Kosovo. I mean, I just find this appalling that you have leaders in Serbia like Vucic who can't see this. And take the stupid argument, well, we're for territorial integrity. Oh, well, so we want our territorial integrity respected, so therefore we want respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine respected. No one respects your territorial integrity. You want to be a part of that club, the EU club, and the EU is not going to have you. You want to be a part of that EU club, you're going to say, you got to forget about Kosovo. You want to be with us, forget about Kosovo. Anyway, so what is the best strategy? I think your best strategy is forget NATO. NATO is never going to be your friend. But I know that he'll do his weepy thing that we are just a small country. We don't have any power. We have to do what NATO tells us. What can we do? We're just this tiny country. God. Anyway, let me see. So, yeah, I can go. Let me. Yeah. Okay. R. Brown says, I'm a capitalist to a degree, but there are certain ugly truths about capitalism that can't be denied and should be rejected. Union bosses are similar to the capitalists they negotiate with. At the end of the day, the owners get most of what they want, and the union bosses get most of the rest. The working guys are the ones who get stuffed. Well, I mean, I guess you can look at it that way, but the union bosses were there who, at least in theory, I mean, you can argue what the way it works in practice, but in theory, they are there to, collectively bargain with the owners of capital, and the owners of capital, have one idea in their mind only, one idea: how can they make the biggest profit possible? Which means how can they pay their workers as little as possible, and how can they hire as few workers as possible. And against that, you really have nothing. I mean, you absolutely have nothing to resist. I mean, anyone who's worked in any corporation knows what it's like going to work every day. And, is this the day that they're going to fire me? Is this the day they say, well, the times are very tough. We're sort of heading towards a recession, or we're in the middle of a recession, or, there could be a recession next year. We need to make terrible choices now. We need to make very, very hard choices. We need to let some people go. But we're doing it for the good of the company, so that the company will be able to weather the storm and be stronger in the future. And that's it. There is nobody there who's going to fight for you. There's nobody there who's going to protect you. You go into human resources and they tell you, this is your last day at work and we've got a 2-week severance package. Is that okay? Because even if it isn't okay, you're gone. So that's the inevitability of this of a situation where you don't have any unions. And when you've been told, the workers have been told, you're going to be so much better off once there are no more unions. You really, really will be much better, much happier without the unions. Yeah, now you don't have anyone to protect you, and it should have been obvious. Anyone who knows something about the history of capitalism, of course, this is what they're going to do. They're constantly going to be firing people. And then constantly replacing people with cheaper labor, preferably somewhere outside the country, where they can get some people on some in the Philippines or in Cambodia, where they can be paid $2 an hour. So one can attack unions as much as one likes, but if you don't have anyone batting for you, then you're just always going to be out on the street, and ultimately, the results are apparent throughout the Western world, which is for working people, their pay hasn't gone up at all. For I don't know how many years, ever since the 1970s, their pay hasn't gone up at all. What a shock! A real surprise. Anyway, where am I? Oh, let me go back. Where? Okay, let's see. Seems to me I've lost my. Oh, okay. Let me go back. All right. So Mary says Russia wasn't interested in Donbass joining Russia as well. Even I thought they did a referendum. That's right. And again, I mean, it could be because of the fear of sanctions, but then 2014, when they had the referendum, Russia told them not to have a referendum. They nonetheless had a referendum, and then Russia said, we're not going to recognize the results of the referendum, or at least we're not going to act in accordance with the will of the people of the Donbass. So that was in 2014. Russia ignored the results of the referendum and instead went ahead with that Minsk process, which was always going to be a disaster, and it was always bogus. It was always a fraud. And again, Zhirinovsky, we were talking about him earlier. Zhirinovsky said, this is a fraud. Absolute fraud that Russia is indeed being led by the nose. I mean, Putin now says we were led by the nose, but it was obvious to Zhirinovsky, it was obvious to anyone, that of course the West is lying to you. Of course they have no intention of implementing Minsk. Of course they're not going to allow any kind of Russian influence in the Donbass, which is what, having the special constitutional status. If you give them special constitutional status, this is what the Western powers know, that means recognizing a particular Russian presence there, Russian influence there. They were never going to accept that. It was never going to happen. And it was always going to end in disaster. Anyway, R. Brown says, fun fact about Grapes of Wrath and on the waterfront, Henry Fonda and Marlon Brando are from Omaha, Nebraska. Fonda's mom was friends with Brando's mom. Was it? I didn't know that. When Henry was young, he studied acting under Brando's mom at the Omaha Community Playhouse. In their respective films, they portrayed workers abused by the system, Fonda by owners, goons, and Brando by union goons. That's interesting, but I'm just thinking in terms of their age. I mean, Fonda was quite a bit older than Brando. I'm not sure now about their ages, but Fonda and Brando are not really of the same generation. I mean, Brando emerges after World War II. I mean, Fonda was already a major star before World War II. When Henry was young, he studied acting under Brando's mom. I mean, it's possible, but it's just funny to think of them as in any way contemporaries. Because I'd have to look up their ages now, but Fonda had to have been quite a bit older than Brando. Summer Petrus, thank you very much. I would definitely be in favor of screening of the film Reds. This is for very personal reasons. I believe my own father is in the film as an extra. Oh, that's interesting. And I would love to spot him. Do you know at what point? I mean, there were a lot of people, a lot of extras in that film. Do you know where he, the scene in which he appeared? The director wanted non-Anglo-Saxon types in the crowd scenes. Well, he didn't come from Petrograd, but he did hail from a village on the outskirts of Nyíregyháza in northeast Nyíregyháza in northeast Hungary. Vote on everyone. Okay. Okay. That's good. I'm hopeful. Okay, thank you. And then Mary says, common to all these political discussions is land grabbing. Yeah, it is. And then Takfiri says, I just left the VA hospital in Manhattan. I met the U.S. military on active duty. NYC, there are no active duty military hospitals. And he told me he's out because there's a conscientious objector cause equals full veteran benefits. I don't understand. Does that mean that he doesn't get veteran benefits? Is a conscientious objector? Yeah, so I don't quite understand. No. Cynthia says, High Pressure sounds like a film that's right up my alley. Well, I think William Powell, I think, is he's always entertaining. I mean, leave aside the sort of the Thin Man movies, which I think, at least the first couple of ones were entertaining. Then it got a little tiresome, but I think the first two were quite fun. And it's similar enough to Glengarry Glen Ross to be put in the same poll with it. Okay, let me write this down. Make sure. So, the Hucksters, Glengarry Glen Ross, and High Pressure. There's also another one, again, something you might know. I think it was something like Callaway Went That Away. I think some film like that. I can't remember the exact title. The title was Callaway Went That Away. It has Fred McMurray in it, which was also, I think, about advertising or advertisers. But again, much more lighthearted than Glengarry Glen Ross. I mean, that was pretty intense. But anyway, and then Mary Grossman says, you're so correct on corporate layoffs. 45 years at 3M. I escaped some, but 3M had product divisions, so you could be hired by a division that was profitable. An example is Magavid division, which made videotapes. Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, it's there's no sentimentality in there, because they were saying, well, it's for the good of the company, because if we don't make these tough decisions now, at this moment, this company might not survive. We have to We're going to lose our friends. You know, so many of our friends were lost in this layoffs. God, it breaks our hearts. I mean, they have this absolute crap they put out. They couldn't give a rat's, you know what, about the people they throw out on the street. But they, you know, they have their people who write these stupid memos. And what happens? Yeah, Brown says Fonda was born in 1905, Brando in 1924. Yeah, no, I mean, they're a different generation. Brando would have been a year old when Fonda started studying under his mother. Yeah. What are we going to call the theme for these movies? Well, I think something like hustling. Oh, another film. Oh, you know, speaking of hustling, you know, is Tin Men. I don't know if people have seen it. Tin Men. It's Barry Levinson with Richard Dreyfuss and Danny DeVito, which I think is quite. I think that's quite fun. Let me put that down. So yeah, the Hustlers. So, Tin Men. If anyone can think of another one along those lines for the poll. Anyway, Takfiri says, I work for Trump as a union iron worker, $110 an hour. Well, that's good. And about 2,250 gross a week. Oh, that's nice. And believe the labor we put into building a standard column would take great skill. Today, iron workers are the last of the Mohicans, and the journey and danger are left in cultural great American mystique. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's but I mean, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, you had this union; they would negotiate nice little nice little pay packets. Let's see if there's anything else that we can address. Let's see. This is the part that's hard. I'm looking at on the YouTube page where well, not yeah, the comments on the YouTube, but I'm looking at the Rumble Studio page where with tiny white letters and against a black background, which is extremely hard to read. And people say, "Oh, you need glasses." You know, even if you wore powerful glasses, you know, one of those granny glasses, you wouldn't be able to read this. Anyway, Rupert Feller says NATO is racist towards Slavs. Yeah. I mean, it has that the quality of the Germans. You know, there's always, you know, the Germans have always been the kind of the silent force behind NATO. They've been they've kept a low profile since 1945, but their influence is ubiquitous. Oh, lucky man, Hugh Keenan suggests. Okay, I wonder what people think about that. Oh, lucky man. It was made in 1973. It's a kind of a sequel to If. And it was made by Lindsay Anderson, who made a kind of this film about a minor public school, If. And the whole point of If was, of course, a mockery of Rudyard Kipling's famous kind of valedictorian poem, If. But then, you know, Oh Lucky Man is the continuing saga of the guy who was the hero, if you can say, of If, Malcolm McDowell, the one who kind of ends the film with machine gunning everybody. So, but that's in Oh Lucky Man. I don't know whether that's a suitable film for the gaggle. Cynthia, you're very good at on telling us what is and what is not as suitable for the gaggle. I don't know whether you think Oh Lucky Man is suitable. So Mira Martin Parker says the West has no self-respect. Yeah, look what they do to their own people. Us Gregor Samsa. Oh, that's interesting. That's a kind of a nice one. Yeah, we are Gregor Samsa. Sometimes they're kind and build a little roach motel and put some fentanyl inside. Okay, that's not bad. That's yeah. It's a nice kind of metamorphosis. So thank you for that. Let's see. Oh. Let's see. Jane says, "Hey George, it hurts to remember those events of 2000 to 2015. Complete humiliation." I don't know. I mean, is that are you referring to Ukraine, or Russia, or Serbia? I mean, it's a lot of humiliation to go around. But Meg Galucci, late but here now. Good to see you, Meg. All right. Well, I think my time is up. Thank you, everybody, for all your comments and suggestions. We've got. I think the makings of the next screening. I think if it's going to be The Hustlers. So we got four titles here. So I think it's and then we'll see how the vote's going to go. So anyway, thank you so much. Thank you above all to those who contributed generously. Really appreciate it. It's what keeps us going, which is, it's very hard, with all these corporate scumbags who don't give us anything. So, thank you so much for these your donations, and we will be back on Thursday, the same time, and look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you. See you then. Good night.